Testing, 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 testing. 1, 2, 3. Okay, this seems to work now. Hello, boys and girls, and welcome to the channel Xcode Build. Last time we did something not so interesting. It was a little bit boring. I understand. Okay, whatever. Today we will be building something a little bit more fun. Building an API endpoint. We're going to do some authentication authorization. I'm not quite sure which one it is, but I think you can Google that. Well, anyways, we're also building a command line tool to interact with that and consume it. So yeah, without much babbling, have fun, enjoy. At the end of this video tutorial, you're going to have a fully functioning API, and you should have a command line tool where you should be able to find a user, you should be able to destroy or delete a user, you should be able to do things like updating a user. Also, you also be able to do the basic things like updating, and also you should be able to list the users in the DB. You should also be able to say find a user, for instance, to see all that's in the database. Also, you'll be able to have a fully functioning database, which is going to be basically SQLite, where everything will be saved in the for future. And I'm going to leave the link to the GitHub repository. You can go over the code, you can clone it, and you can play around with it. So without much trouble, let's get to actual development. So let's dive right into setting up our development environment. I'm going to go ahead and make a directory called user auth. And once we have that directory created, we're going to open it in, we're going to cd into that directory. Then we're going to do code dot. If you're using Windows, you can just create that folder and run the directory itself. So once we have this code opened for our project, we open up our terminal at the bottom by going on terminal and clicking new terminal, or using the shortcut that you see provided here. Once we have that, we're going to do an npm init. This will basically initialize our node project. The dash y is to use the default. Once we have that, we realize that our package.json folder is created. We're going to go ahead and install all the packages that we need. I'm going to leave that in the description or in the GitHub repository that we will have created. So once we click on that, it's going to go ahead and run Sting, and then ensure that all the packages, all the dependencies that we need are created and installed. We're also going to install some dev dependencies. You actually do not need to create that. We were just installing that so we can have some intelligence in order to set different types that are provided by Express or CLIs. This is not something which you actually do have to, but I'll go through some of the CLIs types that have been provided. So once we have that installed, we notice that our package.json folder has been updated with all the dependencies that we need. We're going to go ahead now and set up the project structure. So we'll create a folder called src, which is going to host our DB, our source code. So at this point, we're going to create a folder called util, and inside util, we're going to create a file called .env config. And inside that, we're going to import as .env. This will ensure that we have access to our .env file from .env, and we'll just go ahead to say we'll export default function env, and we're going to say .env.config. Then we'll get back into our server folder and we'll say .env.config. We import that. At this point, we're going to include that here. .env config.env. We can change that. Configure.env. Then we will just go ahead and show that we create our server. So we're going to just place a placeholder here to say this is where we'll initialize our routes. And we're going to go ahead and say this will be a server object. So we're going to say const server equals to http dot create server, and then we'll pass in our express application. And at the bottom, we're going to run an anonymous function, and we'll say async, and then we'll say server dot listen. But before we do that, let's set our port. So we're going to say app dot set, and we want to set our port, right? And we'll set that to port for now. Let's take care of that. We will go ahead and create a file in the source folder. We'll call that server support.js, and in that we'll export function, call that normalize port, and it's going to take a value, and we'll say const port equals to parse int, and we'll take the value and we'll provide the second parameter, which is going to be the radix number as 10. We'll say if is not a number, our port will return. If it is not a number, we'll return the value, and we'll say if port is greater than 0, and the port, else will return false. So let's say normalize port. We'll come in here and we'll say import normalize port. I think we have a little issue here. Let's get rid of this function for now. We're going to say our port is equal to normalize port, and we'll say process.env.port, and let's go ahead and create our .env file. Inside our .env file, we're just going to create some of the things that we'll need. So say CLI connect going to equal as we'll say you can source folder and the file called db, and the file is going to sequelize.sql.yaml. We'll also set our base RL is going to be just going to paste this in here. We'll make use of these variables later on. We can also set the port value equals to 3000. We're now going to go ahead and create an anonymous function. So we're going to say async. And then once we create that, we're going to go ahead and run that, and we'll say server.listen, and this will take a callback. This will take a port and a callback function. You can also include localhost, which will be our host name, and then we'll then take a callback, and we'll say const address. Let's put that in short form. Server.address, and we'll then say clg console log. We're going to place a backtick for string literals, and we'll say server send the HTTP host, and then provide then we will provide port. So this is our basic server setup we have right now. So this is our basic server. I think we made a mistake here. So let's say const port, and I think we're not exporting this as a default. And we're going to go ahead and create an error handling folder. So come inside source, we'll say errors.js, and inside our errors folder, we're going to go ahead and say import default as util from till, and then we're going to export a function, and we'll say to handle 404. It's going to be in middle without taking the request, the response, and the next function. We'll say const error equals to new error. I will say not found, and then we'll say res.status. It's going to be 404, and we're going to chain this function and say that JSON twice in the message error message. We're also going to create export function. Call this handle internal server. I'm going to take an error message, an error, take our request, response, and the next function. We're going to say const status, const error, say internal server. Then we'll come at the bottom and we'll say press status. And we can do status equals to 500, and we will say and then we're going to say res.status. So if our error came with the status, then we're going to set that status, or we'll say 500, and then we'll say, let's just copy this line of code here, and then we'll say I think we don't need to set this, we can place this in here. Then we're going to create a function which basically is going to handle the process error. So say export function and process. And I think we don't need to type this in. I think we're just going to copy that and paste that in. So this will basically handle uncaught exceptions and unhandled rejections. So we're going to get back into our server, and in here at the top, import errors.js. We're going to import handle 404, handles internal server errors, and handle process errors. We're going to place the handle process errors at the bottom, and then we're going to pour our routes just below the process, the server object. The server, we're going to handle this. I think we should place that below our routes, right? Handle errors, app.use, handle 404, handle internal server errors. Once we have that complete, it's time to go ahead and run our server. So in order to do that, we'll get into package.json. We have our scripts at this point here, and we're going to go ahead and create our start and dev scripts. I think I think this is an error. Sorry. In our scripts, we'll have our start script, and it's going to be just in v Node.js .js, and we'll have our dev to be first in v node.mon .js. Let's fix this, and we'll come back to our terminal and we'll say npm start. This will run our server on this particular pod, but because we're in the development environment, we want to run the dev server that will have a code reload. So we'll say npm run dev. So we have a server running, and in order to do just a quick test to ensure that we're able to get access to our server, let's come up here and say app.use, and then we'll give it a default route, and then we'll say next, and then we're just going to say looks fine. So we have next. It tells us missing after argument. Okay, sorry about that. So in order to run a quick test, we're going to come to our browser, and we're going to basic localhost 3000, and you see that our server works just fine. So that's just a quick test of our server. So we have our server running, and we know about that. We're going to go now into our source folder. Let's set up our database. So we'll call this db, and inside the db we will create our index.js, and inside here, let's get rid of everything else, close others. Inside here we'll say import as SQLize, do an import as JS.YAML, import as fs from fs extra, and then we're going to say let's SQLize, and then we'll do an export async function, connect the inside here. We'll see if SQLize return SQLize. This is because we're going to connect to our database multiple times, and once we do that, we want to ensure that if we already have a connection to the database, we just return that connection and we're not bothered about it. So we're going to now say await fs read file the process.env. Let's check this in our .env just to be sure. Okay, that will be our YAML file, and then we'll set the encoding as UTF-8. So let's go ahead and create this particular file. So let's copy this name this will be our connection file, and we'll come into DB. Let's create a new file. Once we have that, we're going to say our DB name, users, our username. We're going to leave that empty, that's empty, and then our params. Our dialect is going to be CLI, and we want to have storage. We're going to store the SQLite database in the root folder, so we'll call that user SQLite. So we have this file. Let's close our env. Let's come back to where we're connecting our database. Then we'll say await JS YAML dot load, and then we'll load our YAML text, set the encoding to this. Then we're going to structure our params, db because we already have params defined here. We're going to say params, and we'll rename that as SEQL, is SQLize params. Then we'll say SQLize equals new SQLize. We'll pass in the DB name, pass in the username, we'll pass in the password, and SQL params. At the end, return SQLize. So we're going to move back into our server. In here, we're the port run db index.js, and we will do connect db. Now we want to ensure that before we run our server, we'll be able to connect it to our database. So we're going to say await connect db dot then, and we'll get our db instance, and then we'll say console.log connected base successfully, and then we will say console.log. Just want to be able to ensure that once it's connected, we are able to see which models we have connected to our database. So say till inspect, say db models. Once we have that, we will then run our server after we have a connection to our database, and we're going to place a .catch here, and then we're going to error. Going to say if we do have an error, first of all going to log that error, and then we're going to do a process.exit and pass in a signal of 1. So we notice that we have connection to database successfully. It's trying to print out the models, and then we run our server. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to create our models that we need. So the first thing we'll do is we'll go into our database. We're going to create a folder called models. Inside here, we're going to create user.model.js. Inside here, our models folder, we're going to import CLI. We're going to import, what do we need? We need CLI, and we need data types. And once we have that, we're going to export default class model. Is going to extend CLI.model. I don't think we actually need to do this. We can just port the model and say it will extend the CLI.model here. And then we're going to have extends model, and we're going to export an async, and this will be to initialize user model. It's going to take in the CLI object instance. We're going to say user model dot need. Going to take a username, going to be of type data types dot string, going to be a unique value of true. This is to ensure that we do not have multiple same username. We're going to create another variable. So first name, going to be data types dot string. We're going to have a password. Okay, we don't need to copy this over and over again. Paste, copy, paste, email, copy, paste, string, and then the initialization for the model takes in CLI object. Then we also set the model name users, and then we do an await user model dot sync. This can take options like false or alter, but we're just going to leave it like this because we're not going to create any data in the database at this moment. So once we have that, we get back into our server. Set our server. Need to get into, I think that will be the DB. And before we return the CLI instance, so let's say analyze models. So we're going to import from models user.model.js, and we're going to say initialize model, and at this point initialize model. So what you will notice, okay, no CLI. Oh, so we need to pass in our CLI instance. So what you notice is that inside the models, we now have users model. So we're going to go ahead and create the auth model and include that as well. So we'll go into models. We'll say auth model.js. So inside here, we're going to do almost the same thing. So let's go ahead inside our user.model. Let's copy this top part. This is here, but we'll call this auth model. and let's say sport async function. I'll call this initialize model, and going to take in a CLI instance as a parameter, and then we'll say auth model dot init, and it's going to receive user. It's going to be of type data types string, going to be unique, true, also going to have token. Then we'll pass in our option. It's going to be sequelize. So the reason why we just put a single sequelize is because it has the same name as this. Normally you would put it as this, but that is just going to be repeating ourselves. So we don't do that. So if it has the same name, just put that single name. And I will say our model name to be auth. And once we have that, then say await auth model dot sync. Now, because we're going to use certain tokens, let's go ahead and create those tokens, right? So this is in case where, you know, that once you have an API and then you want a third party to be able to use that API, you issue them a user ID or some token that they can use to identify themselves. So we're going to have our initial ones. Now, if it's a real server, when they do register, then that API key. So this will be our token user. It could be API keys, whatever you want to call it. Then once we have this here, let's come down to the bottom and say await. We're going to do sequelize the transaction. We're going to take an async transaction. We're going to say for constant auth token users, and we're going to say await auth model dot find or create. Now the reason why we are getting IntelliSense auto completion, this is because we installed the types. That's why we get, you know, it gives us all the available functions on the auth model. So we do that and say we want to find or create where token user goes to auth dot token user. We can also say, okay, we want to ensure that since the values are all unique, we also want to ensure that the token is not already found in the database. So auth token. And then once we have that, we need to pass in the default. It's going to be spread our auth object. Then we pass in the transaction object that we want. Once we have this, let's go ahead and initialize our auth model. So come in here, initialize auth model, and then we pass it the sequelize instance. As invalid identified value. Okay. Oh, I think auth in, so this should be off. That should fix the error. So if you notice now, we now have our models. We have the user model and the auth model. And we've also created this token users. So let's go ahead and check our database to ensure that this has been. So I use a software called dbeaver. So we'll go ahead and run that. And if you notice as well, our database, which is the user SQLite.SQLite, has been created. So while we wait for our dbeaver to run. So dbeaver basically is a database manager. You can use different tools that you want. I think I preferred, for some reason I like dbeaver. It's quite lightweight and gives access or connections to different databases very easy. So once we have our dbeaver here, let's maximize this. We're going to go ahead and say add. We just want to ensure that our database was created successfully. Click next. We're going to do an open. We'll come into YouTube. This is our user. Let's test our connection. That works fine. Finish. And then once we're in here, we can then run npm script just to ensure. So if you maximize this, you come to tables. So we have both auth and our users table. Let's run a CLI on that. So select from users. At the moment, we're going to have no users found. And then let's try to say from auth. And you notice that both our auth users were created successfully. So before we go on to creating our routes, let's go ahead and create some helper functions for hashing the password and comparing the passwords, and also for checking that the third-party user is going to provide us with some sort of the right user that we can check that. So we're going to go into utils. We're going to create a file, and we'll call that password. I'll call that bcrypt. We're going to be using a package called bcrypt to be able to hash and compare the password. We're going to say port from bcrypt. Then we'll say export. We don't necessarily need to export this. So let's take away the export because we're only going to use this salt rounds here. So we're going to say export async function hash password. Then we're going to say let's salt equals to await bcrypt dot gen salt is generate our salt, and we'll pass in the salt rounds. This salt round will ensure how difficult it's going to be to be able to crack that password. And then we're going to return await hash, pass in the password and the salt. So the next helper function we want to create is export function password. It's going to take a plain password and then the hashed password from the database, and it's going to then await bcrypt dot compare. I'm going to compare plain the hash sort. Why do I have this error keep opening up? Export async. So let's verify this hash password. Yeah, the next helper function that we want to create is going to be a middleware. We can create an extra folder called middlewares, but let's just put it under util for now. So we're going to create a new file. We'll call that file auth user auth user.js. You can use slashes or dot. I think let's use dot slashes for that. Inside this folder, we're going to import as model form db model slash auth model.js. So let's just quickly check if we exported it as a default. Oh yes, so we exported it as a default. So let's come back here. So we're going to say export async function. Always check the out. It's going to take in request, once, and next. Then we're going to say let auth equals JSON parse. We want to check the request headers for, I hope I've spelled that correctly, hopefully. Then we'll say if not auth you want to return status of 401 and passing a message of basically this will mean that the user did not provide the tokens. And then we'll now go now if the user did provide the right tokens. So we'll say find auth user from, and we'll say const auth user await auth model find one, say where token user is equals to auth user dot user need to put this, and then we'll say the token should be auth user dot token. Now we say if not found, which means that it did provide a token, but then this user is not found, this particular token is not found, then say then the status 401 JSON, and we'll pass in a message of service provider, and if everything works fine, we'll just run the next middleware function. For some reason, I cannot spell service correctly. So let's go ahead and create our user service and our routes. So let's close this up. Let's say inside the source folder, let's create our routes, and then we're going to say user.route.s. Let's get rid of everything else. We're also going to create a service folder. Service, let's call it services. Inside here, we are going to create a user.service.js. Inside our routes, let's create our first route. Let's just set up our router. So we're going to say default as express. Once we have that, we're going to import our services and our routes differently. Let's just go ahead. Okay. Express, yeah. I'm going to say const router is equals to express dot router. Could have just imported router as well by just saying router, but let's use this way of doing it. We're going to, let's export default router, and then let's just say router.use. Going to have create user, and we're going to have a function called find or create user. We're going to import that from services. We haven't yet created that, so let's get into our server just to set up our routes. Set our routes just after we've initialized all this middleware that ensure that we have our cookies and all that. So we'll come here and we'll say app.use, and we'll set our base route to this. Say we want to use the user route, so let's say user router. Then we're going to have an error, which is fine, and then we'll say port routes.userroute.js. Then we'll say we want to port default as user router. Remember that we called it router here, but then we're importing the default, which is the router, and we are naming it user route. We're getting an error here, which is fine for the moment. We're just going to go ahead and create that particular service. We no longer need this. We already run our test and we're sure that our server works fine. So we're going to come into user service. Let's get rid of this. We need to create this find create user. So insert here, we're going to say import let's import our database. So we're going to say .db/index.js. So let's see, did we export it as default or not? So it's not, it's a named export. So we're going to come here and we're going to say connect db. Then we're going to import our user model from db/models/user model.js. So what we want to get is okay. Let's see, we exported it as default, so we say import default as user model. You can do the alternative you can do is you can just say import user model from this, but I prefer to use so that the default, so I am sure that this is a default model. This helps you with really understanding the difference between named exports and default exports. So that's it for now. Let's go ahead and import. We're also going to need our helper functions. So that will be from util. We should have named these utils. I prefer utils. Update. Okay, yes, I want that to update it. It's going to update this here. So we want to compare password and hash password. We're going to use this as, and then let's go ahead to say export async function, and it's going to be find or create user. This is actually a middleware, so we pass in the request response object for the next function. Then we're going to put this in a try catch block. So we'll say try catch, then down the bottom here we're going to say next, and then we pass in the error. This is in case we have an error. It's going to run this, and then once this is run, it's going to then go into our errors, and then it's going to run the errors here, which is going to be either the 404 or one of these error middlewares here. So let's go ahead and say in our try catch block, we want to connect to our database, right? But remember that inside our connect database, if we already have the CLI initialized, it just returns that. It's not yet initialized, it goes ahead and runs, connection to the DB, synchronize the database, and all that. That is taken care of. So we'll then say let user equals to wait, find one username. We can just run that as well, but because we're going to be trying to fetch the user from the database, not just once, we don't want to write multiple functions for that. We're going to go ahead and create that particular function at the bottom. So let's come here, and then we'll say async. Fine. Let's export it. We don't have to, but let's say export async function. Find one user. I'm going to take in a username, and we will have then say const new user query params, and then we'll pass in the request. And I don't think we'll do this here. Let's do this. Let's say const user await user model find one, and then we'll say where username. Remember, we can say username.username, but since both the parameter, the name in the database is the same as the parameter we passed in here, we're just going to leave it as, and then we'll then say user equals user. If the user comes from the database and we find that user, we want to say Sunny pass in the user, or we return undefined. Now, the reason why we are sanitizing the user is because since this user is a model, it comes in with several functions. Because we're using SQLite, it comes in with to delete and to perform all other functions, and we want to be able to strip just the user parameters that we need, send that to the. We're going to go ahead and create the helper function. So we'll say sanitize user. I cannot spell sanitize to save my life. So we're going to say function sanitize user. It's going to take in a user, and we want to say const equals to user. So we want to get only the stuff that we need. So we're going to say username. We want the username. We want the first name. We also want the last name. We also do not want to send the password to the end user, because we don't need them to password it. We're not hashing it at the moment. And the last thing we want to get out of that is the email, and then say let's sanitized past tense user equals to, and then the ID for that is going to be the username. Then we'll say username, passing the username as well. So we'll assign the username to the ID. Remember, the username is unique. Also pass the first name, pass the last name, pass the email as well, and then we will then say return sanitized user. We could have just done return here. We don't necessarily need to create an extra object here, so we can just say return this, and let's get rid of the sanitize user at the bottom. So we have this function here that sanitizes the user, and this function is used at the top. The last thing we need to do here is say return user. We still have an error here, which is completely fine. Cannot find module dev config blah 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 in server.js. Okay, this is strange. Did not find module dev config.js. So let's get into the server. Cannot find dev config. Okay. We renamed utils, okay, to plural. So does this solve our problem? Configure, let's say utils .envconfig.js. Oh, okay. So we're getting, okay. So this should be utils dot, that should be in backend. So does this solve the problem? Yes. It's a hash password, blah, blah, blah. Okay, hash password. Let's see. Hash, we spelled this wrong. Does that solve the error? Okay. Now we only have the one that we know that we have not yet created. Let's get rid of this. Let's come into user service. This is find or create. So we here find it. Oh, okay. So everything looks good now. And then let's say, so let's I think we have an error here. So before, we need to get the username from the query. So let's say const is equals to quest.query. So let's say username. That should get rid of the error, I think. User name. It's not defined. This is find or create user. So find or create user. Go to our routes. Okay, let's import it here. That should get rid of the error. Okay, fine. So once we have our user, we're now going to say if the user was not found, if not user, because we're passing undefined, if we did not find the user, we'll then say user is equals to await. So this person passes in a user, and we do not have the user already in the database. So this will do both find and create. So we then say create user, and then we pass in the request. So this is going to be an extra function that we need to create, which is going to be the create user. So we need to go at the bottom and create this particular function. So we then go at the bottom of our file, say async function. Call this create user. It's going to take the request object, and we're going to say const new user. This is the user that we're getting from from the person making the request. So equals to user the params, and we're passing the request. Now we want to be able to strip that data of the new user. So we're going to say function user query params, passing the request, and we will say const press the query. So when we pass in the query, we want to get the username, get the password that was provided. We also want to get the first name. We want to get the last. We want to get the email as well. And then once we do that, we can say return, and let's just copy this here. We return this, right? And once we have that, so once we have, we're going to go ahead and say await user model dot create. We're going to spread out the new user. Then we're going to say the password. We're going to say it's equals to, we're going to await hash password, and then we'll pass in the new user dot password. And then once we have that, we'll save that to the database. We then fetch it back. So we're going to say cons equals to await find one user, and then we'll pass in the request dot query dot username, and then we're going to return the user. So let's do a quick check. I know we've written a lot of code just to find and create a user. So instead of find and create user, right? We have user, we get the username from the query, we pass it into find user. We check if the user is not found. If it's not found, we create the user, and then inside we say if not user, which means that the user was not created for some reason. If not user, so the user was not created for some reason that has to do with the database and all that. Now say return price dot status. Passing a 400, which means they're not created, they're not found. And then we say dot JSON, and then we pass a message that says user not created. I think there should be a status code for not created. You can check that out and edit that code. And then if the user was created or found, we then say res.send. We can use res.json, we can use res.send, and then we pass in the user, right? So we have this. So we have our first route created. Let's go ahead and test that. Now I have a plugin called Postman here. If you don't have that, you can go ahead and go under extensions. You can do Postman and think Postman. And once you do that, you can click on this. You can install the plugin. Once you install the plugin, you are then going to have access to this particular icon here. And inside there, you can be able to use Postman to make API requests and all that. So I have this particular create user here. I did not want to go through the whole process of typing everything in. So I'm passing in query parameters and everything that we need here. We see it's been passed in here. So let's go ahead and do send. Okay, our server is not running. So let's do npm run dev. Okay, let's make the request again. We're getting a server error. Okay, let's try to debug this, right? So let's go into debug. Let's get into our code. This is a user service. Let's put a breakpoint here and a breakpoint here. And let's go ahead and say, what script do we want to run? We want to run the start script. Let's do a run. And then let's make the request again. Okay, we have in the terminal, we have here our server. So let's stop our server. And let's rerun the dev server again. So anyone said yes. Cancel. Let's start here. Okay, one that is attached. Let's go and send our request. It's going to take us to, let's try that again. Okay, so we are, let's do step in. So we are getting our username in the query, and then let's step in. It comes in here, and then it comes at this point, and it fails. Oh, okay. We are resetting or reassigning the user here, so we need to change it from const to let. Okay, yeah, that should do the trick. Let's rerun our server in debug mode, and then let's get into create user for Postman, and let's do send. We come here, we receive from the query. You can also use the watch here. You can watch here to watch. That helps you to see the different variables in here. So let's step out. Come here. Is the user found? Null. User is not found. And then let's take next. Our user is still undefined. User is not found. Okay, now, so because the user is not found in the database, it's going to go ahead and create that user. And let's see, let's do a step out. And let's see what happens here. Oh yeah, so now our user is created. The problem was that we're using a constant instead of a dynamic definition. So we have we can now see that our user is created. Let's go into our database and then let's say select all from users. Voila. And you notice that our user was created. But for some reason, our password is still password. So let's check what's up with that. So for some reason, our password was still password. So let's rewrite this. No, in the process of development, you will make errors like this, and it's just part of the development process. So let's say and then let's just say new user.password equals to, let's take this out here. Let's place this here, and then let's spread this. Okay. User. Okay, so let's stop from the debug. Let's get back to our terminal. CLS. Let's do npm run dev. I'm doing all these and showing you all the errors and all that, just so that you understand the development process, which you should understand by now. It's not about, oh, I'm a genius and all that. This is how development works. So let's go ahead and try to create our user again. Let's just say me. Let's run that. That has been created. Let's go back into our DB. Voila, and we notice that our password is being hashed. We do not want to store plain text password in the database. Now, the whole idea of this video was to be able to create a command line tool that you can use to be able to make queries to API. So we've just tested it and so far we can use Postman. Now let's go ahead and create the command line tool to be able to create a user, and then we'll move on to creating ones for checking the password, fetching a user, and all that. So we want to write a command line tool that would at least create our initial user. So we're going to come into utils. We will then create a file called CLI.js, and then we will then cd into utils. So lscd source util here, and then we have our util file here. Now remember that we installed a library called Commander. So we're going to say import program Commander, and then we're going to we also install Axios. Axios is basically going to help us to make HTTP requests to our service Axios, and then we'll say import util. And then once we have that, remember that we had a .env file, but because our server is going to be running separately and we want to run this file separately, we need to import the .env config so that we're going to have access to our configuration, our config file. So import default as from. So that was in, I think it was in utils. So actually they're in the same folder structure. So get that from the env.config.js. Then let's see how we exported it. So the name export. So no need for a default here. And we will say configure.env, and this will give us access to our .env file. Then once we have that, remember that we had the API token users. Let's copy in one of the API keys that was provided, and then we'll now say const, and it's a function that is going to, then here we'll say const http clients, or we can just call this Axios client is equals to Axios dot create. Then Axios will take in a base URL, which is going to be process.env.user base URL. So this is basically what we have in our .env file here, but just in case we did not provide that, we will then say our base user API is going to be this. Then we're going to provide some headers. Then we will say content type is going to be application.json, and then we could pass in authorization headers, but I want us to show what will happen if we do not pass that. Remember that when we did create our first user, we did that without any need for an API key. So let's go ahead and return Axios client. Then we're going to do our program setup, which is going to be program dot description. Let's just pass that in. We don't have to type that in. So let's put it on a separate line because we're using a string. And then we're going to go ahead and have our create. We are going to go ahead and have our create user command. So we will say program dot, let's put on a second line dot command. Now you can look up the library on how to use that. So we'll say add, and then we want to pass the username, and then we will say dot description, and then we will say, so this will be add or create a user to the user server, and then we'll pass in an option, and that will be an option for password. Yes, and then that is going to description message, password for, and then we add another option because we want to collect the username, the password, first name, last name, and email. So we now say, sorry, option, we're going to get first name, and the first name will get, let's see, it's going to be passed as first name. Then we're going to pass a description to say first name. We can do the same thing, and then we will just say last name. Let's get rid of this, and instead of this we'll say last name. Sorry about that. And last name, and to get rid of this, get rid of this because it's a chain function. Dot. Okay, and then our last option is going to be dot option. Say email, then it will be passed as email, and then we'll say description of email of. Then it now takes a dot action, and the dot action will pass an async function into that. That async function will take the username, which is basically the initial add parameter here. Then it will then take a CMD object, a command object, and this function, callback function, and then we'll say const first CMD object, and from that we will extract the first name. I think we need to change this to capital letters. So first name and last name. So first name, last name, then email, and the password. Then we're going to now say our user data. User data goes to first name, last name, that, and I will also pass in the username. And then once we have that ready, we now have our client, which is this, which creates the access here. So we will now say client function, which returns our access client dot post, and then that will take the initial URL, which is the backend API URL. So we'll say create. It's going to receive some data, but we are not passing data. Instead, we're passing query params. So we'll say params new URL search params, then we'll pass in our user data. Then we can then say then we get our response, say console log created util.expect response. This should have an e dot data, and then if an error does occur, we say dot catch. And then let's create a helper function called log hot error. Let's create this function at the bottom. We say function and it's going to take in an error. Then we will say console.error, and then we'll say stage error.stages, and error is equals to error message and say the reason is that response dot data dot message. So if we do run this function, probably we should get the response to that. But what I want us to do is I want us to add a middleware into the routes here, which is going to be this. So we want that we have our backend API, and we want that anybody who tries to use that will have to check the user auth. So we're going to go into, I think that should be in our server, and then we'll then run app.use check user auth. So what it's going to do is it's going to check the authorization headers and then verify if we provided user information or not. So we have created our authentication or authorization middleware. And if we see here, we notice that we are checking for the authorization header. So we're going to go ahead into a CLI and we're going to pass that in. So we're going to say authorization, and we will say we want a JSON.stringify. We're going to pass an object, and in here we're looking for things like the token user and the token itself. So let's go ahead and say token user is going to come from API.token user. Now remember that this API key is provided to you by, say, the provider who is trying to provide to you this service, and you're the end user trying to gain access to that. So this is a way of protecting the API, just so that specific clients that they do offer these keys to will be able to use that, and not just some random person or hacker. So we'll say token, we're supposed to pass the token as well, and we'll say that it's going to come from API key.token. Now, in order to test that, let us make a mistake. Remember that we had our list of auth users that we were using. So let's put in a wrong token here. Let's add an S. Let's save that. And then let's go ahead and try to add a user. So in order to add a user, if you look at the command or the program that we have here, you have to say node CLI, and then we're going to pass in the password. And then we'll just call the password, it doesn't matter. And then we have to provide the first name. We'll call that Bill. And then we're going to say the last name is going to be, let's say Yango. And then we'll pass in an email. The email is going to be bill@mail.com. And then the last parameter that we have to pass in is the username, and we'll just call the username Bill Yango. So if we do an enter, unknown option password, so I think we failed to add what command. So it's going to be CLI.js, and then we want to add a user, so it's not password. So if we do that, we get a message that says unauthorized to use the service, blah blah blah, see the provider. So I think once we have that error, we notice that we did provide the wrong token. So let's get rid of the S here, and then let's try that again, and let's do enter. We notice that our user is actually being created. So let's go on to DB user. We are connected already to that database. I think I already mentioned how to do the connection thing, but if I haven't, then I will revisit the video. So we have access to this. Let's say select all from users. So our user has been created, and if you notice, our password is hashed as well. Let's go ahead and create the other options. I think let's move on to, and let's do the find user command. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's say program dot, let's put this at the bottom here, dot command, and let's say our command is going to be find. In order to find the user, we want to provide the username. Okay, and then let's come at the bottom here. Let's say that we want to place we want to place a description, and that will be search for user from user service. And then we want to add an action because we don't need much for this, and our action is going to take callback function that receives the username that we provided, and it's also going to receive the CMD object, and our anonymous function taking the client. That's a function, and at the bottom we'll say that get, and the endpoint we're looking to tackle is we're going to use a backslash and then a slash, and then we'll say find, and then we'll pass in the username. Right now, if you come into your user route, for instance, we haven't created a route for that. Okay, let's just go ahead and create the command to find the user, and then we will create the endpoint for that. So let's say it's going to pass in the username as a parameter, and then once we have that function run, we'll say that then, and then that will give us a response. Quick thing that I notice is that we spelled lag instead of log. Let's put an O. That means we have to edit this as well. Sorry, this is just a quick clean house. Okay, so we then say we want to get our res. Let's just call it res, and let's put parentheses around that, and then we'll say we want to console. Okay, console.log. We want to say we found. What did we find? We say util.spec, and we want to log the res.data, right? And if we did catch error, come at the bottom here, and it's a dot should be catch, yeah. And then the catch, we're going to pass in our log caught error. And the log caught error will receive the error object, which is what we're passing in here. So let's go ahead into our user service and look at creating. So let's go ahead and create the endpoint for that. So we're going to go into user routes, and we want to create a route for that. So we're going to say route dot let's say get. Now we did use here. This is wrong. It will work because use will basically check for post requests, for get requests, for delete requests. We're going to update that to a post request, and then we'll now continue with our function here. Going to be, we want to get the find, and then it's going to receive a parameter called username, right? And then this will take in our middleware function, which is going to be find user by username, which is going to come from our services. So then we're getting an error, which is find. And then let's come into our user service. Let's come at the bottom here. So we have final create user. So let's say export async. No, it's wrong. Async function. And then we'll call that find user by username. So it's going to take a request, response, and a next function. And let's write our block of code. So we're going to use a try catch block, right? And if we do have an error, we're going to say next, and then we'll pass in the error, and then we come into a try block, and we say, let's await connect DB. And once we have a connection to our database, we're going to say equals to await find one user. And remember that our find user takes in the name which is coming from our request params.username. So if we look in our CLI, we are passing in that here. That's the parameter we're passing. And once we have that, we'll say if not user, which means the user was not found, we want to do a return res dot status of 4, I think it's 404, which is a not found error. And then we say that JSON, and we want to pass in a message. And then in our message, we're going to have a backtick, and then we will say user, okay, we'll pass in the request dot params.username, and we will say not found. Now, if we do find our user, now we can do an else statement. This is not very clean per se, because we don't necessarily have to do that. We can just get rid of this, and since it's a one-liner, we can put that, but let's just do it this way. And if we do find a user, we'll say res dot, we can use JSON, we can use send. I sometimes like JSON, and then we'll pass in our JSON. We can also say res dot status of 200. You don't necessarily need to pass that, but that is going to be included either way. So let's go ahead and try this endpoint. Let's look at our CLI. What we do need to pass the username. And if we look here, this is the username that we have here. We're going to say node CLI.json, and we have a find command, and the only parameter we need is the username. So if we put in some random name like Paul, we should get action is not find. Okay. So we forgot to get, don't know why this IntelliSense decided to mess us up. Blah, 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 blah. Okay, let's try that one more time. So it tells us request failed with status of 404, not found, right? So we need to pass in the right username, and let's say Bill Yango. Request not found. So let's go ahead and let's go ahead and check out our API endpoint. CLI, we say fine. Let's try a user that we know is not found. Let's say Dora. Okay. I think I have an error with the route here. So let's fix that. So that I forgot the slash. Let's try that again. So again, I don't let's say user John not found, right? So let's pass in the right user. We'll say Bill Yango, and I think that should get us our user. So this is our user that we have in the user or in the database. So let's go ahead and write for the update. Let's try to update our user to be able to change different field parameters. So this time we will start with the endpoint. So let's come into the route, and let's say router dot, we're going to have it get request, and our endpoint will be dash update user. Then we're going to pass in the user name, right? And then we're going to call a function from our service that will be the user. is going to be coming from our user service. Yes, we're getting an error. Yes, I know. Should not be an issue. Fixed it. Let's come in here at the bottom. Let's say at the bottom of find user by username, we'll say export missing. I cannot spell function. Function, that is it. And that is going to take our request, response, and the next function. Open that. Let's put that in a try catch block. And we'll come into the catch and we're just going to say next function. And then we'll pass in our error object. So let's come into the try. Let's do the usual. We'll say await connect DB. And then we're going to say const user run is equals to await find one user, and we'll pass in a request around the username, and we'll do the normal check, right? So if not user found, we want to do a return of first status of 44, and then we want to in a JSON message, a JSON object, and we'll call that which is going to be let's just copy this right here. No need for the fuss. Same message. Oh, we did not find the user, blah blah blah. And then once we have that, we're going to then come outside. So say let user to date. We want to get our object from our parameters. So say use query params, and we'll pass in the request object. So let's put an equals here. And now that we have the update, then we're going to say if request the query, we're going to pass in the password as a query parameter password. Then we will say updated user dot password equals to await hash password, right? And then we'll pass in the request that query password. So let's fix this. Where's the query password? So what happens is this: we're going to pass in the password as a query, and we're going to pass in the auto parameters as params. So we're checking if that password was provided, we want to hash that password, right? So if it wasn't provided, then we don't need to hash the password because we already have the hashed password from the user in the TG, right? So once that is said and done, we're going to do an await user model dot update, and we're going to pass in the user to update. I'm just passing some quick options, and then we'll say where. We want to ensure that our username is the same as what we pass in from the request, the params, the name. We can also use request query the username. Doesn't matter, pick your poison. Okay, and then once we have that, we will just do a res that status of 200 is okay, and then we'll do JSON, and then we'll pass in our updated user. What are we missing? Oh, once we do save or update that, we want to make another query to show that everything works perfectly. So we're going to say count updated user, which is supposed to be this guy here, is equals to await find one user, and then we'll pass in our request params the name, right? And I think this should be fine. If we get an error, we will fix it, no problems. This channel is not meant to have perfect code or, write the perfect code and look smart and all that. Let's work through the errors together. I think that's why when people watch courses online, they get into errors, and then the person who makes the video basically edits those things out. And then sometimes you watch a video and like, oh my God, what did I do wrong? But then the person who's making the video went around, did some edits and all that. I face the same problem. So that's why I'm making this channel and trying to ensure that I'm able to show almost everything so that you can actually better understand what we're doing and how we're doing it. So yeah. So let's write our update. So let's come to CLI, just below our find. Let's come here and then let's say program dot, dot command. Yes, are we getting that right? And we'll pass in a command that says update, and we want to pass the username as a last parameter. And then we'll come here and then we'll say dot. Let's add the description for why not. Let's say update a user to or from the user's service or server, whatever helps you sleep at night. And then we'll say that option. Let's pass in the first option, which is going to be dash that we want to provide the password, and then that will be passed as password. And then we can put a little description for that. We'll say password for user, and then I think that should be it. Dot option. The next option we need to provide is first name. I think no need to copy all of that. Let's just come in here and copy this out. So that will be password, blah blah blah. Let's get rid of this. So you're passing in password, first name, last name, email, and then we will say dot, that should be the action, and let's make that an async function. I think we should have made this one here an async function as well. Yeah. So we say async function, which will take our user name and then our CMD object. Then run this guy up. So let's destructure the password first and all that. We're going to say const. Let's structure that from the CMD object. Now remember, all the options are passed into the CMD object, and the initial man parameter is passed here. So it's this passed here, and then the rest of the options are passed into the CMD object. So what do we need? We have first name, we have last name, and all that. So we're going to say first name, last name, email, and password. Beautiful. And then let's construct our user data. It's going to be passing username. Normally you would say username, but if they have the same name, then you don't need to do that. So first name, last name, email, and password. Okay. Then let's make our query to the backend now, and I will say client, which is a function that returns the Axios object. Dot post. I think it should be a post request. Let's check that real quick. In the route, it's a this should be a post. Yes, it's a post request. Should be, yeah. Okay, so post, and then put backticks, and then we will say slash date user, and then another slash. We will not forget this time, and then we'll pass in the username. So this is passed in as parameter, and then we'll pass in an empty object because we're not passing that as data. So passing them as URL search parameters, not as data. Could have done that, but well, let's have some fun with this. And then we're passing in now the part which is the access request parameter in the config. In the config, we pass in params, and then we say new URL. Please help me. Okay, good boy. Then we say user data. So the URL search params will basically format it properly for the backend to make use of that. Remember that we're using the express.json to convert these to JSON objects, and then we say that. Then I think let's just copy paste this. Then kidoki, and then instead of found, we'll say updated on the JSON. We're calling this as well. So let's do a quick check. Getting the rest, blah blah blah, rest of data, blah blah blah. Okay, let's try this. Fingers crossed. If we get errors, we will fix it. Okay. let's test this out real quick. Let's say, let's first of all say node CLI, and then let's say find, we want to find Yango. We should get an object, and then now let's do an update. I think we can just use the find. So we can do node CLI.js, and then instead of add, we'll change this to update. And let's update. At the very end, we're going to change the password to ensure that the password was actually changed. Let's change the first name to Bobby. Let's say Brown. And then let's change the last name to Sugar. Sugar. Why not? Sugar. Sugar Daddy, whatever. And let's do enter. That should work. We then see that the first name was changed to Brown, the last name was changed to Sugar. Now, if we do find of Yango, we should get this. And if we go into the DB and then we search, select all from users, we should have a Brown Sugar. So let's move on to creating, what do we do next? Let's do a password check, right? This way we'll be able to change the password and then do a check to see how that works. So let's get to that. So let's go into our routes. That's where we always start. Let's copy paste this. It's going to be a post request, and then we're going to say password check. So say password check. I cannot spell password correctly. So password check. Then we're going to use check the password D, obviously. Jesus Christ. Let's come here. Let's do password check. Let's copy. Oh, we already copied that. Let's come into our service. Let's come below update user, and there's a helper function. So let's put that. Let's say this functions. Let's come here. Let's say let's do the usual. Let's say we have to export that. Let's say export this thing. Cannot spell function for God's sake. It's going to take in our request, our response, our next function, and let's export async. What are you complaining about? Export async. Oh, I meant function. Jesus, function. Let's do the normal. We say try catch block. Let's copy this here. Yeah, I'm too lazy to type, I know. And then let's come into a try block. So we do the usual, which is connect DB. Once we have that, we say const user is equals to await. We do the usual, which is find one user. And then let's make it interesting now. Let's say find one. Now do something different here. So let's say user model find one. Now we could have used the find user or whatever, but I want us to play around with different things, and let's not be boring. How's this? Well, I'm boring, it doesn't matter. Let's see. Username. So we'll get that from requested. So we're going to pass that as a query, and then we say the username. I'm doing things differently just so that you can play with it and you can learn to see the difference when I'm just going to pass into params and all that. So hopefully this works. Okay, and then let's have a variable called like checked. Let's put this in past tense, and then we say if not user, the user was not found, we will then say checked is going to be an object. We can make it an object here. We can make it an empty object, doesn't matter. And let's leave it at that. We're having some fun, right? I hope. So we'll say check false, which means the user was not found. We're not. So username, just passing in some message the username, and then we'll pass in a hold. For God's sake, I think we're having too much fun. Could not find a user, and then we will say else. You don't have to use else, you can do a return statement at that point, but let's do it this way. So else, let password we'll say let password check is equal to wait. Then we'll say compare password. Remember we had by CRUD check for us, and then we pass in first the query the password, which is going to be the plain password, and then we have our encrypted password, which is user dot password. Okay, I keep making mistakes. I'm not going to edit that out. Then if we do find that user check, we then say if password check is true, right? We use I think it's called an ternary, whatever, and then we now say checked to be equals to checked true. Then we'll say username user name, and then we'll pass a message with fine. We don't want to pass a message, and or we can just say user password checked be true. Yes. And at the end we'll then say we pass in. So if basically if password check, so this returns true, then we initialize the object. No, initialize into something, but we create the object, and then we say if that is not true, we then say checked equals check, and then we can say check. We can just pass that to true, but we'll just say password check because it's going to be true as well. We can just pass true as well, and then we say username and say request query query the username, then we'll pass a message. If it was not checked, now you know what, let's just do check so we get the right user password checked out. So if that is not the case, we then say incorrect username, or save this. We should get our thing cleaner, and then at the end of the else statement we set the object, and then at the bottom we just say where is the status of 200, which means okay, the JSON, and passing our checked object. Oh, let's see, blah 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 blah. Okay, let's check that out. Let's go now into our CLI and write our command that is going to make use of that. So let's save these. Let's come in here and let's do our password check. The password check, we wasn't going to pass in the username and password. So let's say program dot command. I cannot spell command for Christ's sake. The password check, and then we'll say we're passing two things, right? We'll say username and what? Get rid of these. At the bottom, let's say the description, and then we say check user password. Yeah, check user password for a given user name. Okay, let's say action function we're going to take in two things. We're going to take in our username, password, and cmd object. Remember, we're passing both the username and password here. We don't have any options, so this command object is going to be empty, and we'll just receive these two. And then we're going to, this is our function. Let's make this sing because asynchronous function. Let's open this up and say client, which is a function that returns our Axios object. Let's come to the bottom. I think also post, and we're posting to /check. We're not passing objects, we're passing an empty object, and then we're passing params as new RL search params, passing objects, so username, password. I have a feeling that we have an error somewhere, but let's go ahead and that plays out. Let's copy this then here. Let's paste this bottom here. I think we have two dots here. Let's get rid of that, and let's say and then we catch the error here. Okay, we need to put a dot here. This again. So password check, username, password, check password, cmd, blah blah blah, nothing here. So let's go ahead and test this out. Okay. Yes, unfortunately, I just realized that my lights were turned off. So we're back. The ring light is on. I also noticed that we had an error in the user service where instead of saying user to update, instead called this function here. So let's change that. I just noticed that. So let's get back. So we have our check. So let's say node CLI check password. Let's say Bill Yango. Let's make a mistake. Let's put Bill Yango Edge. Let's say password. So no command check password. Okay. Password. So it's supposed to be password check. So let's make a mistake. The name. So we get false, Bill Yango D could not find user. Let's now get the right user, but then the wrong password. So we'll get incorrect username or password. Now, if we do the right username and password, we should get checked true, username this, user password checked out. Well, I could not spell password. So anyways, you can spell that correctly once you have it open. So let's go ahead and do the on the update. Let's do list users, right? Let's create a function that will list all the users that are in the database. So let's go ahead and create some other users. So let's come in here. Let's go back to, we had the create password update. Let's change this from update to add. Let's add another user called Mary because I'm not sexist. Let's not forget all the women out there. So Mary Yengo, that's my mother's name. Does she have an email? I don't think so. So I'm just going to put Mary at mail, and then I'm going to call these Mary Yengo. Mary Yengo. A password with password as well, so it doesn't really matter. So let's create this user. That user is created, and then if we do a node CLI.js.find and we say Mary Yengo, notice that we can get that from the DB. If we go as well to check all the users, we notice that our user is saved in the database. So let's get back to our code and let's do a list users, right? So in order to do that, let's start from our route. Let's copy paste these. Let's just call this list. we'll call this it's a user service. So say list, and then we'll call the find all users. Let's copy this. Let's add this as an export. Yes, the error again. Yeah, you should get used to that by now. Final user, it's not exported. Let's come in here at the bottom here. Let's say export async function. Find all users who taken a request. I was and next object. I literally cannot spell function. I literally cannot spell function. So yes, we have that to find all users. Okay, so let's do the usual, which is the try catch. Here we say next, and then we'll pass in the error object. And in here we do the another usual connect DB. Then we will come here and we will say let user equals to update user model find all, and then we pass an empty array. Now we are going to sanitize the object because when it gets it from the DB, it comes with all these other functions. Because we're using, I think we're using CLI here. It comes with all these other functions. So let's say user list equals to user list. So let's update that map. Then we'll take each of the users. Then we will do sanitize user, and then we pass in the user. I think sanitize user is here, where we just take the user object. Now, when this comes through the ORM, it comes with save functions and all the other functions that comes with the package. I think the CLI package itself. So where is our final users? Okay, so now we have all the users. And then for some reason, if we did not have any user, let's just do a quick check. If not user list, which means the object was empty, or for some reason we did not find any user, I think we should, and then we can say user list is equals to an empty array. But then I think we will find this, and then we can say rest status, and then we'll put it at 200, which means everything was okay. Then we'll say .json, and then we'll pass in our user list. I think this one was quite quick. So let's go now to CLI, and let us do the list user. So let's come at the bottom here, and then we'll say program dot command. I think you know the drill by now. We'll call that users, and this will take in a description of, let's be quick, please all from, if I make a typo, please don't mind me, just correct it. Action is going to be, we're not going to pass in any parameters in order, we're just going to say CMD object, because we're not passing any actions, we're not passing any parameters. Then say client, which is a function that returns the Axios object. So and.get. I hope we didn't make this a get request. Let's check. So this should be get. Just sorry about that. Then we come back here, Axios.get. Then our endpoint is list. And then let's do the usual. Let's copy the end part here. Let's put this at the bottom here. Blah 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 blah, and then the user list. Blah 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 blah. So this hopefully should work. Let's do Node CLI. Let me just check it. Recording. Okay, it's recording. Easy. I've done that so many times. So Node CLI.js, and then we'll say list users. Please work. And so yes, we get all the users from the D. So I think that so we have all the users here. So I think the last thing we're going to do is we're going to create delete function. So in order to have CRUD, you need to have delete. So we don't need to create a new user. We're going to delete one of the users anyways. So let's come to user route. Let's copy, paste. We're going to call this destroy, call it delete, it doesn't matter. And then we'll say, we're going to pass in the username as a parameter. So that's destroy username, and then we're going to call this delete user. Yes, I know, destroy, delete, doesn't matter. The whole point of being a developer is to be able to be crazy. So we have this. Let's come in here. Let's do our delete. So we are going to come at the bottom, and let's say export. I hope I get this right the first time. Export. Okay, yes, I got it right. No, again, Jesus. Delete user is going to take this our request, a response on our next function, and then let's do the usual try catch. Then we'll say next. I'm getting better at this, right? I'm getting way better. Then we'll say await connect db, and then we're going to say once the user equals to await and user model dot find one, and we're going to say we want to find one where, come on, username is equals to params name, passing in the username. Then we'll come here and we'll say if no user was found, what do we want to do? We want to say rest start stages and pass in the for which means the user was not found. Then we'll do a JSON, and then we'll pass in message that says, okay, I think we know where this is going. User not found. I don't know if we could have typed that shorter period of time. The user requested params not found. We can do a return here. Let's do a return. Then let's come else. Now you don't need to use the else's here. You can just say if user not found, return out of that. You can do it as well. You can do a return, and then you can now come at the bottom and okay. If I did find the user, I want to do an await user. This is what we spoke about, the destroy function, right? Which is basically saying, okay, fine. The reason why we serialize the objects is because we want to get rid of functions like this. Then once we have that, we can now say res send or the JSON, and then let's just pass in a message that says user params the username was deleted. Okay, and once we have that, let's go to CLI tool where we're going to do the delete. Come here, we say program the command. We will say destroy, and then we're going to pass in the username, and we're going to come down. We'll say the description, and we'll say delete the user from user service, and then we'll then say action. The action will take in the username that we passed, then the CMD object which has nothing in it, now passing any. Then we're going to say finds is a function that returns access object dot delete. Just to be sure, this should be delete. This is how developers develop all these tiny errors we make. Now we go back, we fix them, and then we come out the public and say, yeah, I'm smart. Crap. delete. Then we can pass in, so we have a string that we have to pass backslash backtick / destroy, and then we're going to pass it the username. And once we have that, we're going to pass in, we need to pass in configuration, passing in any object for the delete function. And we'll say params is equals to new URL search params, and then we'll pass in the object which contains the username and the password. And once we have that, let's do the usual. Say .then. Then we want to delete it. Okay, and then we log or patch the error. So let's say destroy blah blah blah, passing the username and the password. So let's come down and then we say node CLI, and then we say destroy, and then let's pass in some random stuff, and then some random stuff. What do we get? Too many arguments with destroy, expected one, but got 2. Oh, we're not passing any of this. Let's go back to the service. Delete takes in the request of params. Oh, okay, so we don't need destroy, we need just the username, and we pass it here, so we need nothing else in here. So let's get rid of this. Yes, blah blah blah. Okay, so let's try that one more time. So destroy that. User S is not found. Let's destroy angle, and message user was deleted. If we then do these users, we only get one user back, and if we come to the DB and we search, we get just one name in the database. So I think that should be the end. Okay, so I think that comes to the end of this tutorial. So it's taking me a lot of time to actually do this, so I'm trying to build the channel, so I hope you did like that, and it will really help if you could leave a comment, try to like the video, and also subscribe. This will help promote, this will help motivate me to make more videos like this. I have a lot of things that I would like to make, so it will be nice to get, you know, the usual. So leave a thumbs up, leave a like, and also do not forget to subscribe. This will motivate me to create more videos. So until next time, stay blessed. Oh, one more thing, I'm going to make an intro and put to this, and then try to make an outro so that it makes the channel look cool.